Darius, at 41 years old, understood the arithmetic of a life. His job as a postal worker in Baltimore, a city of brick and grit, brought in a steady $52,000 a year before taxes. It was a number you could build a small, quiet life on. A life with a 2014 Honda Civic with 112,000 miles on it, a worn but comfortable armchair that cost $300 from a discount store 10 years ago, and a simple savings account that rarely crested four figures. It was a life he had shared with Lena, a life that had felt as rich as any banker's. But Lena was gone, taken by a sickness that didn't care about love or plans, and the arithmetic had changed. Now he was in his sister-in-law Claudette's living room, a space decorated in shades of beige and quiet judgment. The centerpiece of the gathering was a half-eaten sheet cake from Safeway, a $45 expense that felt more like an invoice than a celebration. In neat looping cursive, the frosting read, "Goodbye and good luck, Darius." It was a severance cake. He was being formally, politely, and ruthlessly excised from the family. It had been a year since Lena's passing, a year of Claudette's escalating campaign of polite exclusion. He was no longer introduced at church. His name was conveniently left off group texts about family cookouts. And his calls to check on Lena's grandmother, Mama Rose, were met with curt, dismissive replies. Claudette, in her $250 silk blouse, and with her perfectly manicured nails wrapped around a glass of $18 white wine, was the architect of this slow-motion amputation. "It's just for the best, Darius," she said, her voice a smooth, condescending balm. "You need a fresh start, and we need to heal as a family." The implication was clear. He was an obstacle to their healing, a living reminder of their loss, a loose thread in the tightly woven fabric of their bloodline. The other family members, aunts, uncles, cousins, nodded along, their eyes fixed on their plates, avoiding his gaze. They were good people mostly, but they followed the path of least resistance, and Claudette was a river of force. Darius looked at the cake. He'd had his slice. It was too sweet, the frosting thick and cloying. He thought about the 9 years of his life with Lena, the laughter, the struggles, the quiet moments that truly built a marriage. He thought about the promise he had made her in the sterile, beeping quiet of a hospital room. And he thought about the folder in the bottom drawer of his filing cabinet at his small Pigtown row house, a folder filled with 108 ghosts of a promise kept. He had no idea the contents of that folder were about to rewrite the entire family's history. For now, he just smiled a tired, thin smile. "Thank you, Claudette. The cake is delicious." He was playing his part in the fiction she had authored, the story of the poor, peripheral husband who had contributed nothing and was now being sent on his way. What they didn't know was that the real accounting was yet to come. Have you ever been made to feel small by people who were supposed to be your family? It's a unique kind of pain, a quiet humiliation that settles deep in your bones. We're going to see how one man's quiet integrity turned the tables on a whole family. The foundation of Darius's secret was laid 9 years earlier, on a humid Baltimore evening in Mama Rose's small, meticulously kept home in Cherry Hill. The house itself, a brick duplex valued then at around $280,000, was the family's entire history captured in mortar and wood. Mama Rose, Lena's grandmother, was facing foreclosure. The 2008 crash had eaten her pension, and the adjustable rate mortgage she'd been talked into was resetting. The monthly payment was jumping to a staggering $1,100, an impossible sum for a woman living on a $900 Social Security check. The family had gathered in that same living room, the air thick with panic and the scent of the lemon pound cake Mama Rose always made. Claudette, ever the pragmatist, had a binder full of what she called solutions. They all involved selling the house. "We can get her into a nice senior apartment," Claudette had argued, tapping a glossy brochure for a facility that cost $3,000 a month. We can all chip in. The math didn't add up, and everyone knew it. They were talking about dismantling their matriarch's life, selling off her memories to the highest bidder. Later that night, long after the others had left with their empty condolences, Darius and Lena sat with Mama Rose at her worn Formica kitchen table. The silence was heavy. Lena's deep brown eyes, so full of warmth, were clouded with worry. Darius, who had been with Lena for 2 years, was just a postal worker. His salary was modest, but he saw the woman who had raised the love of his life, a woman whose hands, though gnarled with arthritis, had braided Lena's hair, baked her birthday cakes, and held her when she cried. "How much is it, Mama Rose?" Darius had asked quietly. She slid the bank notice across the table. The number, $1,100, seemed to glow with malice. Darius looked at Lena. He did the math in his head. His take-home pay was about $3,200 a month. Their rent on a small apartment was $950. Car payment, utilities, food. It would be more than tight. It would be a sacrifice that would touch every single part of their lives. No more dinners out, no new clothes, no vacations. Their dream of saving for their own small house would be deferred indefinitely. Lena started to cry softly. "We can't, baby. It's too much." Darius took her hand. His own was calloused from sorting mail and carrying heavy bags. He looked at Mama Rose, her luminous, dark skin etched with the lines of a long, hard life. She had never asked for a thing. He thought of his own mother, gone too soon, and the stability she had always craved for him. This was more than a house. It was dignity. It was peace of mind. "Yes, we can," Darius said, his voice firm. He pulled out a pen from his worn work jacket, a cheap $2 Bic, and turned over the bank notice. He started writing down their budget, subtracting, reallocating. He showed Lena how they could cut their grocery bill by $150 by avoiding brand names, how they could save $80 a month by canceling their cable, how he could work overtime shifts on weekends. By the time he was done, the back of the notice was a web of numbers, but at the bottom, there was a surplus, a tiny, fragile surplus of $75. "We can do it," he repeated, looking at Lena. "But no one can know, especially not Claudette. She'll turn it into a weapon. This is for Mama Rose, just for her." And so the agreement was made. The next day, Darius went to the bank and set up an automatic transfer. The first payment of $1,100 left his account on the first of the month, and every month after that, for 9 years, it continued. They told Mama Rose it was a loan, and she insisted on signing a simple promissory note, a document Darius typed up himself, which she kept in her old wooden Bible box. They never spoke of it again. The sacrifice was real. Darius's work boots, which should have been replaced every year, he wore for 3, resoling them himself with a $15 kit from a hardware store. Lena became an expert at finding sales, her pride not in a designer label, but in a grocery receipt that showed 40% savings. Their life was modest, but it was rich. They had Sunday dinners at Mama Rose's, the air filled with the smell of roasting chicken and the sound of gospel music from her old radio. Darius would spend Saturdays fixing a leaky pipe under her sink or patching a drafty window, the parts costing maybe $50 from Home Depot, saving her a $400 plumber's bill. He saw the peace in Mama Rose's eyes, the way she could tend to her small garden of tomatoes and collard greens without the shadow of debt hanging over her, and he knew they had made the right choice. He was giving her a home, and in return, she was giving them a bedrock of love and family that felt priceless. He never once regretted the decision, not even when Claudette would make a snide remark at Christmas about his cheap $89 Timex watch while flashing the $3,000 Movado her husband had bought her. Darius would just smile, knowing the true value of time was measured in the peaceful years he was helping to give the woman who meant everything to his wife. The cruelty began as a slow poison after Lena died. At first it was subtle, disguised as concern. Claudette would call Darius, her voice dripping with syrupy pity. "Darius, you poor thing, you must be so lost. Lena always handled everything, didn't she? The bills, the planning. You must be overwhelmed." It was a narrative she was seeding. Darius, the simple, helpless man-child, incapable without his brilliant wife. He would listen patiently on his simple track phone, a $15 a month plan, while he heard the chime of a new message on her iPhone in the background. "I'm managing, Claudette. Thank you for asking." The poison grew more potent at the first family Thanksgiving without Lena. Darius brought his signature sweet potato pie. Using the recipe Mama Rose had taught him, a recipe that cost less than $10 in ingredients, but was rich with tradition. He placed it on the dessert table next to Claudette's offering, a towering, multi-layered cake from a high-end bakery that had cost her at least $80. "Oh, Darius, you brought a pie. How rustic," Claudette said, loud enough for everyone in the kitchen to hear. "I just didn't have time to bake this year. What with managing Mother's accounts and helping with Mama Rose's doctor's appointments." She portrayed herself as the family's logistical and financial savior, the one holding everything together. She didn't mention that the help with Mama Rose's appointments consisted of arranging a $60 taxi service, a cost the family split, while Darius was the one who often left work early to drive Mama Rose himself, losing 3 hours of pay to make sure she got there and back safely. Later, as everyone sat around the sprawling dining table in her immaculate home, surrounded by her $5,000 dining set, Claudette's husband, Marcus, a decent man who worked in IT, asked Darius about his postal route. Marcus was genuinely interested. Before Darius could answer, Claudette cut in with a tinkling laugh. "Oh, Marcus, don't bore everyone with shop talk. It's a holiday." She turned to the table at large. "I'm just so grateful we're all here. It's been such a hard year. We have to make sure we're all pulling our weight to keep this family strong." Her eyes flickered toward Darius for a fraction of a second, the unspoken accusation hanging in the air like smoke. Darius felt the familiar burn of humiliation, but he just took a sip of water and said nothing. He had just made the $1,100 mortgage payment 3 weeks prior. The escalation continued. Little Zoe's 7th birthday party was the next turning point. Darius adored his niece. He'd spent weeks searching for the perfect gift, finally settling on a beautiful, hardcover collection of stories about inspiring Black women in history. A $35 book he hoped would ignite her imagination. He arrived at the party, a chaotic, joyful affair at a local park pavilion, and handed the wrapped gift to Zoe. Her eyes lit up. Claudette swept in, holding a massive, brightly wrapped box. "Zoe, sweetie, look what Mommy and Daddy got you." It was a brand new bicycle, a shimmering pink model with streamers that had cost at least $200. "And this," she said, handing Zoe a smaller box, "is from the whole family." It was a tablet, a $300 Amazon Fire tablet. We all chipped in. Darius had not been asked to chip in. He had been erased from the whole family equation. As Zoe unwrapped his book, Claudette peered over her shoulder. "Oh, a book. That's nice, Darius. Very practical." The word practical was wielded like a weapon, code for cheap and unimaginative. She then turned to her cousin. "It's just so hard for some people to keep up. I try to tell them. It's about the effort, you know." The final, most brutal confrontation happened 2 months before Mama Rose passed. Darius had stopped by the Cherry Hill house, to drop off some groceries for her, about $75 worth of essentials he'd picked up after his shift. He was helping her put them away when Claudette arrived unannounced, her white BMW 3 Series, a $43,000 car, pulling silently into the driveway. She walked in without knocking, her eyes scanning the bags on the counter. "Darius, what are you doing here?" "Just dropping off a few things for Mama Rose," he said calmly. "I see," she said, her lip curling slightly. She picked up a can of store-brand green beans, which cost 79 cents. "You know, I've been meaning to talk to you. I think it's time you started giving us some space." Mama Rose, who was sitting at the table, looked distressed. "Claudette, Darius's family." Claudette ignored her, her focus entirely on Darius. Her voice dropped to a low, conspiratorial hiss. "Lena is gone. You have no real claim here anymore. You're just hanging on. It's pathetic. She loved you, I guess, but let's be honest. She was destined for so much more. She was brilliant. She could have married a doctor or a lawyer, someone who could have given her the world. Instead, she got a man who delivers mail and lives in a tiny house in Pigtown. She settled. And you burdened her." Each word was a perfectly crafted dart, dipped in a poison of classism and contempt. To hear her say he had burdened the love of his life, the woman he had sacrificed everything for, was a wound deeper than any other. He felt the heat rise in his chest, the urge to scream, to throw the truth in her face like a bucket of cold water. He wanted to tell her about the 106 checks he had already paid. He wanted to tell her that his burden was the very roof over their grandmother's head. But he looked at Mama Rose, whose face was a mask of pain. Causing a scene would only hurt her. So he swallowed the fire. He took a deep breath, the air in the small kitchen feeling thick and suffocating. He looked Claudette directly in the eye. His voice, when it came, was quiet, devoid of the emotion raging inside him. "Lena was happy," he said. It was the only defense he needed. Was she? Claudette shot back with a dismissive laugh. Or was she just too kind to tell you the truth? "Do us all a favor, Darius. Let go. Move on. We'll take care of our own." He nodded slowly. "All right, Claudette." He turned to Mama Rose and kissed her on the forehead. "I'll call you tomorrow, Mama Rose." He walked out of the house, the door clicking shut behind him, leaving Claudette standing victorious in the house he was secretly paying for. The injustice of it was a physical weight, but he carried it, just as he carried his mailbag every day. He knew a day of reckoning was coming. He just didn't know it would be so soon. For the next year, Darius perfected the art of playing dumb. He existed on the family's periphery, a ghost at the feast, absorbing their condescension while quietly upholding the central pillar of their matriarch's life. His silence was his shield and his strategy. He knew that any premature revelation would be twisted by Claudette into a self-serving plea for attention. The truth needed a proper stage, a formal setting where facts could not be drowned out by her histrionics. So he waited, and he endured. Christmas that year was a master class in his passive resistance. The family gathered at an uncle's house, a sprawling suburban home in Randallstown. The air was thick with the scent of pine and roasting turkey. Darius sat in a corner of the living room, nursing a cup of eggnog, a silent observer. He listened as Claudette held court, detailing her recent financial triumphs. "Marcus and I just refinanced the house," she announced to a captive audience of aunts and cousins. "We pulled out $60,000 in equity. We're finally getting the kitchen we deserve. A complete remodel. Viking appliances, quartz countertops. It's going to cost at least $40,000. Her brother, Kevin, a mechanic with grease permanently etched into his knuckles, whistled. "Wow, Claudie. Must be nice." "It is," she said, beaming. "You have to be smart with your money. Make it work for you." Then, she turned her attention to the family's collective burden. Speaking of which, I was looking at Mama Rose's expenses. Her supplemental insurance went up another $50 a month. It's just endless. We all have to be prepared to dig a little deeper this year to help out. A wave of groans went through the room. Darius felt their eyes on him, the unspoken expectation that he, the poorest among them, would offer nothing. He just nodded along with the others, his face a mask of mild concern. He didn't say that the $50 increase was a drop in the ocean compared to the $1,100 he had transferred to the bank for her mortgage just 3 weeks ago. He let them believe he was the freeloader, the one not contributing. He watched Claudette position herself as the family's financial manager, the one bearing the emotional and administrative weight of Mama Rose's care. Every nod, every sip of his eggnog was a lie of omission, a calculated move in a long game. Another lie came in the spring. Kevin's transmission went out on his 2010 Ford F-150. The repair was going to be $2,800. He was in a panic, calling family members for a loan. He called Darius, his voice tight with stress. "D, I hate to ask, man," Kevin said, "but I'm in a real bind. Any chance you could float me a few hundred? I'll pay you back next month, I swear." Darius's heart went out to him. He liked Kevin, but his own checking account, after paying the mortgage and his own bills, held exactly $214. He had nothing to spare. "Kev, I'm so sorry," he said, the words tasting like ash. "I'm tapped out. Things are really tight right now." The silence on the other end of the line was heavy with disappointment. "Yeah, okay, man. I get it. No worries." The story spread like wildfire, filtered through Claudette's malicious lens. At the next family cookout, he overheard her talking to their aunt. "Did you hear? Kevin asked Darius for a little help, and he completely shut him down. Not a dime. I mean, I know he doesn't have much, but to not even offer to help family? It just shows you where his priorities are." Darius was standing not 10 feet away, grilling hot dogs on a cheap $40 charcoal grill he had brought himself. He heard every word. He carefully turned the hot dogs, his knuckles white on the tongs. He was being painted as selfish, as a man who hoarded his meager income while his family struggled. The irony was a bitter pill. He was sacrificing his own financial security for their grandmother, yet in their eyes, he was the one who cared nothing for family. He let the lie stand. It was more fuel for the fire, more evidence of the character they had assigned him. He knew the truth would be all the more blinding when it finally came to light against the backdrop of this carefully constructed darkness. Each insult he absorbed, each false narrative he allowed to flourish, was another brick in the foundation of his eventual vindication. The call came on a Tuesday morning in October. Mama Rose had passed away in her sleep. She was 93. The grief was a quiet, hollow ache in Darius's chest, a final severing of his connection to Lena. But with the grief came a sense of grim purpose. The time for playing dumb was over. The time for strategic planning had begun. The day after the funeral, a somber affair where Claudette delivered a flowery eulogy that conveniently omitted the financial realities of Mama Rose's final years, Darius made an appointment. He didn't call a family meeting. He called Mr. Harrison, the estate attorney whose name was on the simple will Mama Rose had drawn up years ago. Mr. Harrison's office was in a modest building downtown, a far cry from the glass towers where corporate lawyers worked. The space was clean, professional, but not ostentatious. It smelled of old paper and brewed coffee. Mr. Harrison himself was a man in his late 60s, a distinguished black man with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. He had known Mama Rose for 20 years. His hourly billing rate was a steep $450, But Darius knew this was a necessary investment. Darius arrived at 2 p.m. sharp, dressed in his best suit, a simple black one he'd bought for $220 at Men's Warehouse for his wedding. In his hands, he carried a worn leather briefcase that had belonged to his father. Inside was the folder. "Mr. Harrison," Darius said, shaking the man's hand. "Thank you for seeing me." "Of course, Darius, I was so sorry to hear about Rose. She was a wonderful woman." He gestured to a chair. "Her will is very straightforward. She leaves the house to be divided equally among her grandchildren, Lena, Claudette, and Kevin. With Lena having passed, her share would legally go to you as her surviving spouse." Darius nodded. "I'm aware, but there's a complication. The house has a mortgage." Mr. Harrison frowned, looking through his files. "I don't see any record of that. I thought she owned it outright." "She took out a reverse mortgage that came due 9 years ago," Darius explained. "The family was going to sell the house." This was the moment. Darius opened his briefcase and pulled out the folder. It was thick, almost 3 inches, held together by a thick rubber band. He laid it on the polished mahogany desk. "But Lena and I decided to handle it." He opened the folder. The contents were meticulously organized. On top was the original promissory note Mama Rose had signed. Beneath it, in chronological order, were the bank statements from his account for the last 9 years. Each one had a highlighted line item, a recurring transfer of $1,100 to the mortgage company. And beneath that, the main event, 108 canceled checks, printed from his bank's online portal, each one a testament to his silent promise. Mr. Harrison put on his reading glasses, his expression shifting from mild curiosity to focused intensity. He picked up the top statement. He read the promissory note. Then he began to leaf through the checks, one by one. The room was silent except for the soft rustle of paper. Darius watched the attorney's face. He saw surprise, then a dawning understanding, and finally a deep, quiet respect. He looked up at Darius, his glasses perched on his nose. 108 payments for $1,100 each. He did the math quickly on a legal pad. "That's $118,800. You paid this? All of it?" "Lena and I paid it for the first 2 years," Darius corrected gently. "I've been paying it for the last 7 since she passed." Mr. Harrison leaned back in his chair, letting out a slow breath. "And the family? Claudette? They don't know?" "They have no idea," Darius said. "In fact, they believe I contributed nothing. They are under the impression that they were the ones supporting Mama Rose. Claudette is the executor of the will. She plans to sell the house, pay off what she assumes is a massive debt, and distribute the small remainder." The attorney looked at the folder, then back at Darius. A slow, grim smile touched his lips. "Well, I believe we are about to have a very interesting family meeting." For the next hour, they planned the strike. Mr. Harrison's legal mind was sharp. He proposed creating a formal audit, a bound document that would be presented to each family member. It would include a cover letter from his office, a copy of the promissory note, a summary ledger showing every single payment with its date, and copies of the first and last canceled checks as examples. The presentation would be everything. It had to be undeniable, irrefutable, and delivered with the cold, impartial authority of the law. "This isn't about revenge, Mr. Harrison," Darius said, his voice steady. "This is about the truth. It's about honoring my wife and her grandmother." "I understand completely, Darius," the attorney replied, his eyes gleaming. "And sometimes the truth is the most potent form of justice there is." As Darius left the office, having paid a $900 retainer for 2 hours of the attorney's time, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders for the first time in 7 years. The stage was set. The arithmetic was about to be made public. The meeting was set for the following Saturday at 10 a.m. in Mr. Harrison's conference room. The room was designed to be imposing. A long, dark wood table that cost at least $10,000, high-backed leather chairs, and a panoramic window overlooking the city. Darius arrived first, taking a seat beside Mr. Harrison at the head of the table. He was calm. He felt a strange sense of detachment, as if he were watching a movie of his own life. Claudette, Kevin, and their spouses arrived together, a united front. Claudette was dressed in an $8,700 Armani suit, the picture of a successful executive ready to handle business. She carried a $1,200 Coach briefcase. She gave Darius a curt nod, her expression a mixture of pity and annoyance, as if his very presence was an inconvenience she was forced to endure. They all took seats on the opposite side of the table. "All right, let's get this over with," Claudette said, tapping her expensive pen on a notepad. "I have a brunch reservation at noon," Mr. Harrison began, his voice calm and measured. He read Mama Rose's will, which, as he'd said, was simple. The house and its contents were to be divided 3 ways. He then paused, letting the silence hang in the air. "Now," he said, "we come to the matter of the estate's primary asset, the property at 4512 Cherry Hill Lane, valued at approximately $340,000, and its primary liability." Claudette sighed dramatically. "The mortgage. Yes, I've already spoken to a real estate agent. She thinks we can get it on the market by next month. After we pay off the bank and the fees, we should each walk away with a little something. Not much, but it's what Mama Rose would have wanted." She looked at Darius. "Of course, your share will be less your portion of the funeral expenses which Marcus and I covered." Darius said nothing. He simply looked at Mr. Harrison. It was time. "Actually, Claudette, that won't be necessary," the attorney said smoothly. "The mortgage is not a liability. It has been paid in full." The room went silent. Claudette stared at him, her perfectly painted lips parted in confusion. "What? That's impossible? It was a huge loan. Who paid it?" This was the coordinated action Darius and the attorney had planned. Mr. Harrison gave a subtle nod to his paralegal, who was standing by the door. She walked into the room carrying a stack of 5 professionally bound documents, their covers a crisp, official blue. She moved around the table with quiet efficiency, placing one document in front of each family member. She placed the last one in front of Claudette. "What is this?" Claudette demanded, her voice sharp. "This," Mr. Harrison said, his voice resonating with authority, "is a complete audit of the loan account for the Cherry Hill property for the years 2014 through 2023. I suggest you all open to the first page." Darius watched their faces. He saw confusion on Kevin's face, curiosity on Marcus's. He saw pure, unadulterated suspicion on Claudette's. She opened the document, her eyes scanning the cover letter from Mr. Harrison's law firm. She flipped the page. There, in stark black and white, was a copy of the promissory note signed by Mama Rose. She flipped again. She was now looking at the summary ledger. 9 years of payments, 108 entries, each one marked $1,100, and next to each entry, in a column titled Source of Funds, were 2 words, Darius Miller. Darius will never forget the sequence of emotions that played across Claudette's face. First, there was a flicker of disbelief, a neurological misfire. It was as if the words on the page were written in a language she couldn't comprehend. She blinked, her brow furrowing. Then came the dawning, sickening realization. Her eyes darted from the paper to Darius, then back to the paper. Her deep brown skin, usually luminous, seemed to lose its light, turning a pale, ashen gray. The blood drained from her face. "This is a joke," she whispered, her voice cracking. "This is some kind of mistake." "I assure you it is not," Mr. Harrison said calmly. "If you turn to the next page, you will see a copy of the first canceled check from a joint account held by Darius and Lena Miller. And on the following page, the final check from an account held solely by Darius Miller, dated 2 weeks before Rose's passing. The total amount paid is $118,800. The number landed in the center of the table like a grenade. $118,800. Claudette's hands began to tremble. She looked at Darius, her eyes wide with a desperate, panicked fury. You did this? You don't have that kind of money. You're a mailman." The insult was reflexive, the last gasp of her dying narrative. Darius finally spoke. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the tension like a razor. He looked directly at his sister-in-law. "You said we all have to be prepared to pull our weight to keep this family strong. I was just pulling my weight." He was using her own words, the callback technique Mr. Harrison had suggested, and he could see the devastating impact it had. Kevin was staring at the document in his hands, his mouth hanging open. He looked up at Darius, his expression one of profound, gut-wrenching shame. "For 9 years, Dee? 9 years you did this and never said a word?" "It was a promise I made to Lena," Darius said simply. Claudette slammed her hand on the table, the sound making everyone jump. "I don't believe it. He's lying. This is forged. He's trying to steal the house." "The documentation is irrefutable, Claudette," Mr. Harrison said, his tone icy. "Every payment is sourced directly from Mr. Miller's bank accounts, which we have subpoenaed and verified. The mortgage company confirms the loan is satisfied. The only person at this table who has a legitimate financial claim to this property is Darius." The fight went out of her then. All the arrogance, all the condescension collapsed in on itself, leaving behind a hollow, defeated shell. She sank back into her expensive leather chair, her Armani suit suddenly looking like a costume on a broken doll. She stared at the blue binder as if it were a snake. She had built her entire identity in the family on being the competent, successful one who held everything together, who managed the burdens no one else could. And in the space of 5 minutes, a quiet mailman with a folder full of canceled checks had demolished that identity completely. The room was utterly silent. The only sound, the faint hum of the air conditioning and the frantic, ragged sound of Claudette's breathing. The arithmetic was done. The aftermath was not a loud explosion, but a cascade of quiet, personal reckonings. The consequences of Claudette's long campaign of cruelty and the family's passive acceptance unraveled person by person, dollar by dollar. For Claudette, the downfall was swift and total. The meeting ended with her sitting in stunned silence, unable to form a coherent sentence. Her husband, Marcus, who had always been civil to Darius, looked at his wife with an expression of pure, unadulterated disappointment. He stood up, walked around the table to Darius, and extended his hand. "Darius," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I am so sorry. I had no idea." He didn't even look at Claudette as they left. The drive home, Darius later heard, was a silent, Arctic affair. Her authority within the family, which she had wielded like a scepter, was shattered. She had been exposed not as the family's savior, but as its chief architect of ignorance and cruelty. The $8,700 suit could not hide the shabbiness of her character. Her social standing within the family, once paramount, was now worthless. The rest of the family was consumed by a tidal wave of guilt. The pleading began that evening. The first was a text message from Kevin, received at 6:15 p.m. It read verbatim, "D. I am so ashamed of myself, man. I can't believe it. I treated you like crap, And all this time you were literally keeping a roof over my grandma's head. I don't know what to say. I'm sorry doesn't even cover it. I owe you everything." An hour later, a voicemail from his Aunt Janine. Her voice was trembling, on the verge of tears. "Darius, honey, this is your Auntie Janine. I just got off the phone with Kevin. I feel like the smallest person on this earth. The things Claudette said, and we just let her. We went along. Oh, Lord, can you ever forgive us? We failed you, baby. We failed Lena's memory." There were 8 messages in total. Each one was a variation on the same theme: shock, shame, and a desperate plea for a forgiveness Darius wasn't yet sure how to process. They were forced to confront their own complicity, the lazy cruelty of their assumptions. They had judged him by the labels Claudette had applied: his job, his income, his quiet nature, and had missed the measure of his character entirely. The most significant consequence, however, came from the one person who had never judged him: Zoe. 2 days after the meeting, Kevin's wife, Maria, brought Zoe to Darius's small house in Pigtown. Maria was crying before she even got out of the car. She hugged Darius tightly. "We're so sorry, Darius. So sorry." Zoe, oblivious to the adult drama, ran up and threw her arms around his legs. "Uncle Darius, I missed you." She pushed a folded piece of construction paper into his hand. "I made this for you." Darius unfolded it. His breath caught in his throat. It was a drawing, made with the fierce, joyful intensity only a 7-year-old possesses. It was a picture of a family sitting around a dinner table. There was Mama Rose with a halo of white hair, Lena with a big smile, Kevin, Maria, Claudette, and Marcus. And there, sitting right between Lena and Mama Rose, was a figure labeled Uncle D. He was wearing his blue postal worker uniform. In her hand, the figure of Zoe had drawn a big red heart right over his chest. She had used a brown crayon for everyone's skin. The specificity, the unprompted inclusion, the pure love of it. It was a more powerful absolution than any of the tearful apologies. It was the only one that mattered. Legally, the house was his. The promissory note, combined with the proof of payment, constituted a clear claim. At an impromptu family meeting held without Claudette, who was reportedly not leaving her room, they unanimously agreed. Kevin, speaking for everyone, told Darius that the house was his, free and clear, as repayment for the debt, both financial and moral. They formally signed over their shares of the inheritance to him. The $340,000 house in Cherry Hill, the home he had saved from the shadows, was now his. But he knew, looking at Zoe's drawing, that he had inherited something far more valuable. He had inherited the truth. 1 year later, the house at 4512 Cherry Hill Lane was filled with a different kind of life. The quiet rooms where Mama Rose had watched her stories and tended her plants now echoed with the bright, chaotic sounds of learning. The scent of lemon pound cake had been replaced by the smell of chalk dust, old books, and the faint aroma of the pizza Darius ordered for the kids on Fridays. Above the freshly painted front door, a simple, elegant sign read, "The Lena and Rose Tutoring Center." Darius had inherited the house, but he knew it was never truly his to live in. It was a vessel of memory, a monument to the 2 women who had shaped his life. Selling it felt like a betrayal. Living in it alone felt like haunting it. So, he had found a new purpose for its sturdy brick walls. He had invested his own small savings, about $15,000, and secured a small community grant for another $20,000 to transform the house. The living room was now a reading area, with colorful beanbag chairs and shelves overflowing with donated books. The dining room was a math and science lab with secondhand computers and microscopes. The upstairs bedrooms were quiet study spaces. He had kept his job at the post office. The steady $52,000 salary was still the engine that powered his life, but his evenings and weekends were spent here. He wasn't a teacher, but he was a steady, calming presence. He helped a 10-year-old sound out a difficult word. He showed a teenager how to organize a history paper. He made sure every child who walked through the door had a snack and a safe, quiet place to work. The center was free. It was his gift to the neighborhood, a way to build something positive from the ashes of his grief and the family's betrayal. His family, what remained of it, was slowly rebuilding. Kevin was a regular volunteer, his skill with tools invaluable. He'd built all the bookshelves and repaired the aging plumbing, his acts of service a quiet, ongoing apology. Zoe was there every day after school, her laughter the center's unofficial theme song. She would sit at her grandmother's old kitchen table, now the art station, and draw endless pictures, her braids with their colorful beads clicking as she worked. Her latest masterpiece was taped to the refrigerator, a drawing of Darius with a superhero cape flying over the tutoring center. He rarely saw Claudette. He'd heard she and Marcus had gone to counseling. She had sent him a single, stilted letter of apology 6 months after the meeting, a page of careful, lawyer-approved words that said all the right things but felt hollow. He had never replied. He didn't harbor any anger towards her anymore. Forgiving her wasn't about letting her off the hook. It was about letting himself off the hook of having to carry the weight of her cruelty. He had forgiven her for his own peace, not for her comfort. One crisp autumn evening, as the sun set and cast a warm, golden light through the windows of the center, Darius sat on the front porch, watching the last of the children get picked up by their parents. Zoe ran out and gave him a fierce hug before climbing into Kevin's truck. "Bye, Uncle Darius. I love you," she yelled out the window. He smiled. "I love you too, sweetie." He sat there for a long time, the cool air on his face. He thought about the numbers that used to define his life, his salary, the mortgage payment, the balance in his checking account. He realized now that he had been doing the wrong arithmetic. True wealth isn't measured in dollars and cents. It's not found in an expensive suit or a fancy car. It's measured in the promises you keep, the lives you touch, and the legacy you build. It's the quiet satisfaction of a child's laughter in a house that love saved. It's knowing you honored the people you lost by creating something that would give the next generation a chance to grow. That, he thought, was a kind of wealth no one could ever take away. What do you think is the truest measure of a person's worth? It's a question we all have to answer for ourselves. Thank you for joining us on Love Beyond Pride, where we believe the best stories are about the quiet victories of the human heart. If this story moved you, please consider sharing it with someone who might need to hear it. We'll see you next time.